fast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to roll-out facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation.
And today, we're diving deep into a feature piece that's got some serious buzz. This isn't just commodity analysis, you know. This one's got layers that'll make every farmer rethink their approach to trade expectations, especially concerning our reliance on China. If you've ever felt burned by an optimistic market forecast before, you need this deep dive.
We are absolutely going to do a deep dive into what we're calling the promise delivery gap.
Right.
It's this massive, undeniable discrepancy between the headline-grabbing international trade announcements, specifically, agreements the U.S. makes with partners like China, and the actual reality.
The reality of what actually gets on a boat and gets paid for.
Exactly. And we have data sourced right here that shows this gap isn't just a slight miss. It's consistently ranging between a near total collapse of 2.7% delivery.
Wait, 2.7%, that's not a gap.
No.
That's a chasm. That means if the government announces a deal that's supposed to stabilize your forward pricing, you have historical data suggesting that, 9 out of 10 times, that stability won't materialize. And in the worst cases, 97 out of 100 times, it won't.
And the context here for everyone listening is crucial.
Yeah.
This is not about politics. We're not judging foreign policy here.
No, this is dollars and cents.
This is purely about financial planning for your farm.
Okay.
It's your fiduciary responsibility. Trade optimism, those big declarations that say the market is secured for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
That kind of talk drives major financial decisions.
Oh, absolutely. That's the conversation you have with your lender.
It is. Your decision to pull the trigger on an expansion or take out that new equipment loan.
Right.
It's all predicated on those headline promises.
And when you look at the stakes here, the cost of getting this optimism wrong is it's frighteningly high.
It is.
The analysis shows that for a typical 1,000 cow dairy, that massive fluctuation in price, driven by these under-delivered trade promises, can cost you upwards of $91,000 annually.
$91,000.
That's the kind of volatility that hits your replacement heifers, your feed contracts, your ability to make capital improvements. It touches everything.
And here's the controversy we want to tease right up front, because this gets at a core assumption a lot of us operate under.
Okay.
The common belief that your cooperative membership somehow insulates you from this volatility.
The co-op shield.
Yeah, the data says otherwise. We're going to look at why massive global co-ops, names you trust like Friesland Campina and Fonterra, are struggling with the exact same structural challenges. And often they struggle even harder because they're just slower to adjust.
It's time to start taking the political sound bites at face value, isn't it? We need a rigorous risk mitigation framework.
And that's exactly what we're building today.
We're turning skepticism into savings.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core issue we're analyzing is the promise delivery gap. It is the fundamental disconnect between the promise, which is always, rhetorically 100%.
It's a feed sale.
A guaranteed sale. And the execution, which is always lower.
Yeah.
Often, drastically so.
I think we have to start with that most shocking number to really set the baseline for expectations. Give us the snarkest example you found, the one that just screams volatility.
The soybean example is truly shocking because it was so widely reported. The initial announcements, the ones that gave farmers across the Midwest that burst of market confidence and pushed up grain futures.
Everyone remembers this one.
They announced that China had committed to purchasing 12 million tons of U.S. soybeans. 12 million tons.
That's a massive commitment. That sort of declared demand changes the entire hedging strategy for the global feed complex, which directly impacts what dairy farmers pay for TMR ingredients.
Okay.
It creates this powerful, if temporary, sense of guaranteed demand. And more importantly, lenders and large processors read that too. They bake that expectation into their future projections.
Precisely. Now here's the critical reality check.
Yeah.
By mid-November, USDA export data showed that only 332,000 tons had actually shipped. That's not what was ordered, that's what left port, and was confirmed as delivered.
Okay, stop right there. You've got 12 million promised, 332,000 delivered. So mathematically, that is a what? A 2.7% delivery rate?
2.7%.
Wow.
You couldn't fail that badly if you tried to sabotage the deal. If you based your purchasing power, your inventory management, or your financial forecasting on a 12 million ton commitment, when 97.3% of that demand just vanishes.
Or never shows up in the first place.
Right. It's not just disappointing, it's catastrophic for a business model.
And that's the danger. A farmer doesn't see that 2.7% number immediately. What they see is the immediate market spike the announcement caused. So they might lock in feed contracts or purchase inputs at a higher rate based on the expectation of higher milk checks that just never materialize because the underlying demand didn't ship. That lag time is where the financial damage happens.
Now, the pushback we often hear is, well, that must be an anomaly. That has to be a one-off timing issue. But the data shows this pattern of under-execution is consistent. Let's zoom out and look at the broader pattern of the Phase 1 trade agreement.
Right, the big one from January 2020.
This was the largest, most structural commitment we've analyzed recently.
$80.1 billion. I mean, that's a figure designed to instill massive confidence and stabilize the market after years of back-and-forth trade disruptions.
The commitment was clear. $80.1 billion in U.S. agricultural goods over 2 years. The Peterson Institute for International Economics meticulously tracked what actually transpired. And they are the gold standard for this, They look at customs data, verified shipping manifests, not just press releases.
No spin, just the hard numbers. And what did their data show?
The actual purchases delivered over that 2-year period were $61.4 billion.
Okay, so if we're looking strictly at the agricultural target, that's 77% delivery.
77%.
And that, surprisingly, is actually the high end of the historical execution rate we've seen in major trade deals with China.
It is. 77% of the ag target was met, yes. And if you look at the total commitment across all sectors, manufacturing, energy, everything, the overall execution only hit 58%.
So what does this all mean for you, the dairy farmer?
It means the fundamental range of reality for major headline-level trade promises, based on recent history, is 2.7% delivery on the low end.
The soybean disaster.
And 77% delivery on the high end. You cannot, under any circumstances, plan your business around 100%.
That range, 2.7% to 77%, that's nearly 75 percentage points of massive, unpredictable volatility.
That's the devil in the details.
That's the gap where farms start making desperate moves. I mean, think about the real-world impact. You're talking to your lender about financing a new freestall barn in Wisconsin or upgrading your milking parlor in the Central Valley. That's a 15-year asset.
A huge commitment.
Lenders approve those multi-million-dollar loans based on projected revenue stability and market growth forecasts. But when the very foundation of that forecast trade execution varies wildly by 75 percentage points from one deal to the next, the rug isn't just pulled out from under you, it's burned away. You have to start assuming the worst-case scenario within that historical range.
It's the constant psychological battle, isn't it? The news says secure demand, but the data says maybe 1/4 of it will ship. We have to shift our mindset. A political declaration is not a financial guarantee. It's a talking point.
No, I think it's important we acknowledge the context here. It's easy to be skeptical in hindsight. The volumes we saw in 2021 and 2022, those were real.
They absolutely were.
They boosted prices, and they genuinely improved milk checks for many operations. When things are good, optimism is infectious.
It is. And that's the dangerous power of recency bias. When your milk check is up and everything is green, it's incredibly hard to feel skeptical about the market outlook. It truly felt like we had finally hit a sustainable baseline, a new floor of permanent, high international demand.
I remember talking to neighbors who were finally pulling the trigger on equipment upgrades they'd put off for 5 years. They looked at 2022's margins and thought, this is the new normal.
But the critical question that most operations, and critically most lenders, didn't ask was this high volume driven by sustainable structural growth, or was it a cyclical peak that had an expiration date stamped on it?
And the research makes it clear it was the latter.
Without a doubt. The warning signs were visible in real time, if you knew where to look.
Let's break down those 4 key structural indicators that clearly showed the peak was temporary. Because if you had looked at these 4 points, you wouldn't have financed that big expansion in 2022 with the same blind optimism. You'd have seen the clock ticking.
The first, and arguably the most powerful indicator driving demand, was the African swine fever, or ASF, recovery. ASF devastated China's domestic protein supply. According to OECD data, China lost roughly 40% of its hog inventory between 2018 and 2019.
40%. I mean, that's an economic catastrophe in protein supply. So they suddenly had this massive, urgent, and temporary need for feed imports, soybeans, corn, and crucially for dairy whey components. They were scrambling to rebuild their hog herds just to feed their own population.
It was essentially a commodity emergency response, not sustainable market growth. We were exporting dairy components because the average Chinese consumer was suddenly drinking vastly more imported lattes.
No, we were exporting feed because 40% of their livestock infrastructure was wiped out and needed immediate replacement.
We were filling a giant hole.
And when the hole is filled, the demand for the shovel stops.
Exactly. By early 2022, Iowa State University's Ag Policy Review documented that the herd recovery was largely complete. The source material refers to this moment as the import engine shutting down.
So the structural driver was gone.
The structural, temporary driver for massive feed and feed component demand, which had kept our prices elevated, was gone. Any forward-looking analyst should have adjusted projections immediately.
That's the plain English synthesis.
Yeah.
We were busy feeding their emergency, not their long-term, stable growth plan. When the emergency ends, so does the demand spike. It was structurally temporary.
The second indicator was purely mechanical, the Phase 1 expiration. That agreement was not designed to roll over forever. It had a hard stop date, December 31st, 2021. This was publicly known.
A hard stop date. I mean, if you based a 10-year loan on the market stability from a 2-year commitment, you were already introducing massive, unnecessary risk the minute the ink dried. Any purchases after that were entirely voluntary, easily manipulated, and subject to any geopolitical pressures that emerged.
The third factor is perhaps the most strategically worrisome for dairy, and it's about their internal political planning. China's aggressive self-sufficiency goal. The Chinese government explicitly targeted achieving 70% dairy self-sufficiency. This isn't a secret. It's a publicly stated national policy objective to reduce their reliance on external suppliers.
They are actively trying to make us redundant. That's what that target means.
And they are succeeding. By 2022, Hugrecht analysis showed they had already reached 66% self-sufficiency, and that number is demonstrably climbing year over year.
So while we were seeing good component prices, they were concurrently building massive domestic processing capacity and increasing their domestic milk production.
Exactly. This structural reality tells us that even if trade relations improve, the underlying need for U.S. dairy is shrinking by design.
I mean, if you boil that down for the farmer, you're betting on a buyer who is actively building his own competing plant right next door. Why would you assume that buyer's going to stick with your product long term? Finally,
the global economic reality pointed toward contraction. The Asian Development Bank projected that China's GDP growth would slow significantly, from around 8% in 2021 down to a more modest, structurally sound 5% by 2024-2025.
And 5% GDP growth, while still good globally, means reduced consumer confidence and consumption. When disposable income tightens, what's the first thing that gets cut? Often it's the higher value imported specialty goods like certain cheeses or high-end components. It impacts consumption across the board.
That's the comprehensive picture. We had the high of 2021-2022 because they were facing a feed emergency and fulfilling a 2-year commitment. But lurking behind that peak were 4 structural factors guaranteeing a downturn.
The end of the emergency, the expiration of the deal, their strategic goal to replace us, and a slowing economy.
This is why forward-looking indicators, like their self-sufficiency goals and the hard stop on agreements, must override current performance when you're financing 10 or 20-year assets. You have to plan for the structural reality, not the cyclical spike.
If you didn't factor in those 4 points in 2022, you were using historical data to make a future decision, and that's just a recipe for disaster.
Let's follow the money now. The speed with which policy disruptions move from Washington or Beijing to the farm gate is astonishing and, well, terrifying.
It's an immediate, painful cascade. A dairy farmer in Idaho or New York doesn't need to read an economic analysis to know the market is tightening. They see it in the component price compression. They see it in their forward contract prices.
Let's detail that tariff cascade, specifically focusing on the recent 2025 tariff escalation data that hit U.S. dairy. Retaliatory tariffs on U.S. dairy into China escalated rapidly, moving from an already painful 10% up to an utterly prohibitive 125% between February and April.
125%. That's not a tariff. That's a ban disguised as a tax. That means that your product suddenly is completely uncompetitive against a supplier from the EU, New Zealand, or Australia.
Who might be facing zero tariff, or maybe just a single-digit one.
Exactly. You are priced entirely out of the market.
And the market impacts were immediate and brutal, especially for specialized component manufacturers. First, the whey market contracted sharply. USDEC data show that China had been consuming roughly 42% of U.S. whey exports.
42%. That is a monumental hole to fill. Whey, while often seen as a byproduct, is a huge margin driver, especially for large processors.
It offsets raw milk costs.
Losing nearly half that export market overnight means two things. Domestic supply backs up, and prices for whey premiums crash. If you were counting on those higher component premiums in your milk check, you felt this loss immediately.
And lactose faced a similar, if not worse, pressure point. China held roughly 72% of the U.S. lactose export market share.
Wait, 72%? That's not diversification.
Not at all.
That's hyper-optimization for a single volatile market.
It is. When that 125% tariff wall went up, processors that were optimized specifically for that export stream were forced into immediate, painful, and often costly restructuring. They have to find new buyers or shift that product into lower-value domestic channels, or sometimes they have to dispose of it.
The ripple effect is unavoidable. When major processors are restructuring and fighting to move massive surpluses of product, domestically product that used to go into high-margin export contracts, they cannot possibly pay the same price for raw milk. They have to pass that cost of market closure back to the members and producers.
That brings us to the final, quantified impact, which hits every producer regardless of their component mix. Following these trade-driven market contractions, the USDA had to revise its price forecasts downward. We saw Class 3 projections drop by about 35 cents per hundredweight, or 100 locked.
Okay, let's quantify the loss, because long and 35 cents sounds like pocket change in a $20 price environment. But on a commercial scale, that is absolutely brutal to the bottom line. Let's walk the listener through the math so they can check it against their own operation.
Absolutely. We're going to use the benchmark. A typical 1,000 cow operation, we'll assume they produce around 26,000 pounds per cow annually, which is a standard benchmark for commercial operations.
So 1,000 cows times 26,000 pounds means they're producing 26 million pounds of milk annually.
Right. And since 100 weight is 100 pounds, we divide that by 100. That gives them 260,000 hundredweight of production per year.
Okay, and that $35 drop in price, we multiply the 260,000 hundred apiece by $0.35. And that calculation confirms the analysis. That $1.35 reduction works out to roughly $91,000 in lost annual revenue for that single operation.
$91,000. Stop and think about the weight of that number for a second. That is the cost of 2 or 3 brand new replacement heifers, or your entire annual budget for a major parlor maintenance upgrade.
It could be your annual debt service payment on your new TMR mixer or parlor. That's the real-world consequence of a trade gap that swings between 2.7% and 77% delivery.
And it gets worse because farms aren't just losing revenue, they're also getting hit on the expense side, often due to related trade policy. This is the double squeeze.
Right.
It is. Consider the very specific real-world example of Half Full Dairy in upstate New York, a 3,600 cow operation run by A.J. Wormuth. They got hit by this exact double challenge. Tariffs on imported steel and aluminum added $21,000 to their barn renovation order, while milk revenues were simultaneously plummeting due to the export collapses we just discussed.
So they're paying higher costs because of import tariffs and getting paid less because of export tariffs. That squeeze is absolutely suffocating.
As Wormuth told reporters, they're facing a situation where they can't raise prices while expenses keep rising. This isn't just theory. This is cash flow destruction.
And if we look long-term, the implications are stark for the industry as a whole. The University of Wisconsin-Madison dairy economists projected that net farm income across the entire U.S. dairy industry could decline by $1.6 billion on the low end.
Billion with a B.
And up to $7.3 billion over the next 4 years due to sustained tariff disruptions and volatility. Individual farms could face income reductions of 25% or more. This is why we absolutely must have a defensive strategy. You cannot simply trust the headlines when that kind of money is on the line.
We've laid out the structural problem. Now, let's tackle the biggest myth in the dairy industry.
Let's do it.
The common assumption among dairy farmers is that cooperative membership provides meaningful insulation. The thinking goes, If the global market shifts, my co-op is diversified. They have deep international relationships and multiple processing plants. I'll be okay. Is that confidence warranted?
That's the question on everyone's mind.
That confidence, unfortunately, is being systematically undermined by the data. Cooperatives face the same structural pressures as individual farms, but often with less flexibility to respond quickly and aggressively than a private investor-owned processor.
Less flexibility, but they have massive scale. They should be able to weather any storm better than a small regional plant.
You'd think so, but they are caught in what the source material accurately terms the cooperative bind. They are chartered. It's their fundamental legal obligation to their members to accept all member milk regardless of market conditions.
Oh, okay.
Think about the strategic difference. A private processor can decide to idle a plant, pivot markets aggressively to manage risk, or even cut supply contracts.
But a co-op cannot simply tell its member owners, sorry, we don't need your milk this month because our Chinese lactose contract fell through.
Exactly. When processing capacity is built for those high peak volumes, the optimism of 2021 and 2022, but global deliveries decline rapidly because of a trade gap, co-ops suddenly face rising per unit costs.
They're running plants half empty.
Right. They are processing milk at a loss, often substantial losses, just to fulfill their member obligations. And unlike private companies who can exit those unprofitable markets quickly, cooperatives are bound by charter. They absorb those massive losses to try and maintain a competitive member price, and that erodes member equity over time.
So the farmer feels insulated in the short term, but the structural cost is quietly eating away at the co-op's balance sheet.
Precisely. And we've seen the results of this structural stress play out dramatically across the world recently.
Give us the big examples. I think listeners need to hear this data to understand this isn't abstract risk. This is reality for the biggest players.
Look at Friesland Campina, a massive global co-op based in the Netherlands. They reported a staggering 149 million loss in 2023.
149 million euros.
Their partner, Milkobel, posted an 11.6 million loss. The analysis clearly states these were structural challenges driven by market dynamics, the same dynamics we discussed: rising domestic costs, Chinese self-sufficiency, and general European market contraction. The market disappeared, and they were legally and structurally bound to continue processing.
That's 150 million reasons to be skeptical of co-op insulation. When those losses become unsustainable, the only path forward is massive, painful restructuring, often leading to asset sales.
Which is exactly what happened with Fonterra, the global giant based in New Zealand. After years of struggling with market volatility and structural inefficiencies, their members voted 88%, a massive majority, to sell the consumer operations to Lactalis this past October.
That is a desperate and drastic fundamental move. When 88% of your member owners vote to sell off core legacy assets, it reflects an undeniable need to adjust to unsustainable structural losses. They are sacrificing long-term strategic control just to survive the present strain.
Bank dairy analyst Emma Higgins put the challenge directly. The problems for dairy cooperatives are complex because lower milk intake generally coincides with members withdrawing capital, accelerating the financial strain.
So it's a double whammy.
It is. If members are pulling equity out while the co-op is losing millions processing surplus milk, it creates a vicious, fast-moving downward cycle.
So the key takeaway here is that your co-op's balance sheet health directly affects your returns. If they're absorbing massive structural losses trying to sell product into non-existent or high tariff markets, that financial pressure eventually comes back to your milk check in the form of lower competitive prices, reduced patronage, or capital calls.
That's why you, the member owner, need to be proactive. You need to start asking tough, direct questions at the next annual meeting about their processing capacity utilization versus actual milk intake. Are they running full capacity? Are they sitting on surplus inventory?
But we should provide the counterpoint to show the model isn't doomed. The source material mentions Agripor, which achieved a significant turnaround by aggressively restructuring its debt and pivoting towards high-margin segments like specialty cheese.
Right.
The co-op model can be successful, but it is not automatically insulated from the trade promise gap. Success depends entirely on proactive, agile management that asks the tough questions before the losses hit 149 million.
Agreed. Proactive management is key. But the onus is on the farmer, the member owner, to demand that transparency and strategy. Okay, here we go. We've established the problem. The gap between promise at 100% and delivery somewhere between 2.7% and 77%. The core principle that must guide your decision-making is this: Until the physical product ships and the actual money clears the bank, a trade announcement is a political soundbite, not market reality.
That's the mantra. Don't bet the farm on a political declaration. We need a defensive playbook, a 3-step risk mitigation framework we can execute within 48 hours of any major market-moving trade announcement. This is about turning skepticism into an operational advantage.
Step 1. Check the history. This takes 30 minutes. You need to establish a baseline of realism immediately. You cannot accept the 100% promise. Use objective third-party data, specifically trackers like the Peterson Institutes, which diligently maintain promise versus actual purchases, especially for phase 1.
Why is this so important? Because that historical data gives you your realistic planning boundaries. We know phase 1 ran at 77% execution for agriculture, but the extreme low end was 2.7%. If a new deal is announced, you should immediately assume a delivery rate closer to the 77% max and be prepared for the possibility of the low end.
The calculation is simple but critical. Take the new promise, multiply it by the historical execution rate, say 70% if you're trying to be slightly optimistic, or 50% if you're being defensive, and that equals your realistic delivery estimate. If your viability depends on that promise delivering 100% and you only forecast 70%, you already know you are taking a 30% risk based purely on historical underperformance.
Step 2. Model for zero. This will take 1 to 2 hours. This is perhaps the most contrarian step, but it is the critical financial defense. Before you make any major financial commitment, no new equipment, no debt restructuring, no expansion decisions, you must stress test your 12-month cash flow, assuming the announced deal contributes nothing. Zero.
This forces the conversation. If the viability of your business plan depends entirely on this deal working, that's a conversation you need to have with your accountant and lender right now before the market hype fades. You need to verify crucial metrics.
Specifically, you need to check your debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR. Farm credit guidelines typically target a DSCR of 1.25 or higher. In plain English, that means for every dollar you owe in debt payments, your operation must generate $1.25 in cash flow to cover it and have some margin left over.
If the revenue from the headline promise fails to materialize, what happens to that ratio? Does your DSCR drop below that critical 1.25 threshold? If it does, you need to pull back on debt immediately.
And you must know how long your working capital can sustain reduced milk prices. If that sudden $0.35 Sentinel at Seniat drop hits you, the $91,000 annual hit, how many months can you absorb that without running out of operating cash or having to liquidate assets? Documenting this analysis strengthens your position with the lender, regardless of the decision you make.
Step 3. Verify DMC status. This takes 45 minutes. This is a time-sensitive tactical move that can save your farm from that $91,000 loss.
The timing trap is so real. Trade optimism spikes, and farmers often skip or delay dairy margin coverage enrollment. They think, prices look great. Why spend the premium? We're covered by this new global demand.
But when prices fall, because the deal only delivers 2.7%, the enrollment window is closed. For example, 2025 enrollment might close March 31st. If the prices drop in July, you have no safety net. You have to contact your local FSA office and verify your enrollment status immediately, and if the window is open, enroll.
DMC is so critical because it depends on actual market prices and feed costs, not on a politician's promise. It provides reliable margin protection when farm margins compress, and that protection is most valuable when purchased before you think you need it. It is the cheapest insurance policy against the promise delivery gap.
Beyond the 48-hour plan, smart operations are integrating these principles into their long-term strategies. They are maintaining robust working capital flexibility by keeping conservative debt-to-asset ratios. It's not pessimism. It's room to maneuver when the global forces inevitably shift without facing forced asset liquidation.
And critically, they are exploring market diversification. Direct sales, specialty products like organic or A2, or developing relationships with regional, non-export dependent processors. This creates optionality, which is far more valuable than maximizing every metric in a single volatile commodity export channel. Optionality means you have choices when 42% of your whey market disappears overnight.
Right, a farmer just finished milking and is driving to the feed store. They need to turn this skepticism into action. What are the 3 things they need to remember from today? We need to give them a takeaway that impacts their actions this week, next month, and next year.
This is the real mission. We need to frame this not as doom and gloom, but as strategic clarity. First takeaway. Trade promises are discounted. The gap is real, somewhere between 2.7% and 77%.
So the immediate action this week. If a new deal is announced, do not change your feed, ordering, or inventory based on optimism. Check the historical execution rate immediately using that phase 1 data.
Your medium-term strategy over the next 3 to 6 months is to recalibrate all financial projections using a conservative execution rate, say 70% max, for any announced trade-dependent revenue streams. Adjust your hedging based on this lower realistic figure.
Long-term positioning over the next 1 to 2 years. Stress test any major capital investment or expansion decision by modeling profitability, assuming zero benefit from any announced trade deal. Make sure the project stands on domestic demand alone.
Okay, takeaway number 2, secure your safety net. DMC doesn't rely on promises.
Immediate action this week. Contact your local FSA office today and verify your dairy margin coverage enrollment status. If the window is open, enroll immediately to protect against margin collapse.
Medium term, 3 to 6 months. Develop a long-term risk management plan that prioritizes margin protection programs like DMC and forward hedging over speculating on commodity prices driven by geopolitical headlines.
And long-term, 1 to 2 years. Maintain robust working capital flexibility and conservative debt-to-asset ratios. This is how you absorb potential $91,000 annual losses from price drops without resorting to distress sales.
Finally, takeaway number 3, question the baseline. Remember, peaks aren't floors.
Immediate action for this week. Request the most recent financial statement from your cooperative. Ask direct, documented questions about their processing capacity utilization versus actual milk intake volume.
Medium term, 3 to 6 months out. Investigate market diversification or specialty production options A2, organic, regional, to reduce reliance on volatile commodity export channels and counter the risk of market closure, like that 72% lactose dependence.
And long-term positioning. For the next 1 to 2 years, analyze the global structural context, ASF recovery completion, China's 70% self-sufficiency goals, GDP forecasts when making multi-year capital investment decisions. You need to prioritize optionality over maximizing every metric in a single export channel.
That distinction between immediate reaction and long-term strategy is key. The immediate action is purely defensive, discounting the hype and verifying your safety nets.
And the medium and long-term actions are offensive building a structurally resilient business that doesn't rely on foreign policy compliance to succeed.
We covered a lot of ground today, from the structural failures of high-profile trade agreements to the financial instability they create right at the farm gate. The very fact that modern dairy farmers need a rigorous defensive playbook for government trade promises tells you everything you need to know about the system we operate in. We have to be our own best financial defense.
And until that system changes, until those announcements actually match delivery, we have to assume that the gap is real and the potential $91,000 annual cost is real. Don't let headline optimism cost you your working capital or your chance at margin protection.
This has been another deep dive from the Bullvine Podcast. For more straight-talking industry analysis and to see the links to the Peterson Institute tracker we discussed, head to www.thebullvine.com.
Subscribe wherever you get podcasts. We're out with new episodes every day. Upcoming topics will be diving into the real ROI of genomics testing and whether the next generation of robotics is finally priced for small operations. Until next time, remember, optionality is the only real hedge against geopolitical chaos, and never bet the farm on a press release.